It is a great honor to welcome Professor Michael Walzer on the show. He is a political philosopher and the Professor Emeritus of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton University. How are you today, Michael? Thank you. Thank you for joining the show.
Okay. I should tell you, I'm not at Princeton University. The institute is a separate. It's located in Princeton, but it's a separate institution.
That's it. So, but we should begin by asking, what is the Institute for Advanced Study? What do you do there?
It is a research institute established in the 1930s. It played a role in bringing refugee scholars during the Nazi years to America, starting with Albert Einstein. The Institute has 4 schools: a school of mathematics, a school of physics, the School of Historical Studies, and the one I'm in of social science. And each of these has a small permanent faculty, and each one brings 30 to 50 scholars to the Institute each year, all of them post-PhD, to work on projects of their own and also to engage with colleagues in their field. I was at the Institute as a full professor from 1980 to 2007, and since then I've been retired, but still able to maintain an office in the Institute. They are very kind to their emeriti.
I see. I'm glad to hear it. So, of course, you've been known as probably a figure of much renown among the political science, political philosophy department. And I guess my question now is, what makes you interested and, I guess, passionate about studying politics in a scientific/philosophical level?
Yes. I'm not sure I do it at a scientific level. I have been interested in politics since I was a kid. My parents were interested in politics. I learned to reading a left-wing newspaper in New York City in the 1940s. I simply have been politically engaged since I was very, very young. I went to Brandeis University, which was a new, recently founded Jewish university in the McCarthy years, which recruited a faculty by hiring people who couldn't be hired anywhere else, given McCarthyism. So we had a very interesting, very lively lefty faculty.
Mm-hmm.
I got engaged in civil rights activity very, very early. The magazine Dissent, which is a social democratic socialist magazine, was founded while I was at Brandeis by two of my professors. I started writing for that magazine very early. In 1960, the editors of the magazine sent me south to write about the civil rights movement. And I went back again some months later to continue meeting with the student militants and writing about them. I got involved in the anti-war movement in the late 1960s. The 60s were a period of political activity for a lot of people, and they were a period of political activity in a very strong way for me. And since then, I guess I've been reflecting on what it means to be politically active and what it means to live on the left. And I've been writing, all of my books are political arguments. Some of them rise to the level of philosophy, maybe. But basically, I think I'm a low-level theorist, writing close to the ground about things that things that my contemporaries are very much engaged in.
Mm-hmm. I see. So, what sort of advice do you have for, people of my own age who are willing to take on, the social democratic socialist mantle, and how would you make the case for, well, if you want to do so, study political philosophy?
Well, I think politics begins with engagement and activity, and philosophical reflection comes a little later. I do think it's important for political activists to be well educated in the history of politics, in political economy, and in political theory. But I really am an advocate of engagement. I don't think it's right to stand on some mountaintop and deliver political pronouncements. I think you have to live down among your contemporaries and argue with them sometimes, praise them sometimes, but be engaged in politics on the ground. I ended up as a professor, but I think a more natural outcome of my interests would have been, if we had a socialist party in the United States, I might have ended up as the editor of its theoretical journal. Mm-hmm. That might have been closer with the way I started than the way I ended.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, I think being both academics, you and I, we often get the complaint from, non-academics in general, that we're occupying ivory towers, and that we are not engaged enough in the affairs of, the common man, and therefore we hold politics, whether on the left or the right, that is detached from everyday, common concerns. So do you find that to be true?
Well, it's it's true of some of my academic colleagues, not of all of them. You can see it if you read the political theory journals, that some of the people think that the subject of political theory is political theory, and they write about each other. And some of them believe that the subject of political theory is politics, and they write about politics. And I am very much with the second group.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, I think that leads us to the essay which you wrote on Liberty's Journal, which I really enjoy, on moral concern. And I guess I would say that this essay is my introduction to your work, even though, you've been probably a legendary figure amongst the American political scene. And it starts with a quotation from Leviticus 19:17. It says, "You shall surely reprove your fellow." And I found the full quotation here. It says, "Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any way reprove your fellow and not suffer sin upon him." So what is the significance of opening the essay with this particular biblical passage?
Well, it is a useful epigraph because it delivers the argument I want to make that that social criticism, social concern for other people, even for the opinions of other people, should not start with hatred, but it should not refrain from rebuke, from criticism, from engagement with, argument with the views and the conduct of one's fellow citizens. There is, in fact, an extensive discussion among the biblical commentators on that text about how you rebuke your fellows, how to do it without embarrassing them, without degrading them, when to do it in private, when to do it in public. It's a very interesting discussion, but I just pointed readers to the beginning of that discussion.
Yes. Do you find that as a political left-wing intellectual, having to disagree with your fellows on the same political aisle as you, and in some ways risk having to be branded a heretic and all that?
I have to say that in my lifetime, dissenting politics, left-wing politics, has not been risky. It was risky in the 30s and 40s for American communists, who many of whom suffered in the McCarthy period, but I came after that. And I don't think the politics of Dissent magazine or the politics of the anti-war movement was ever, I never had to worry about the secret police coming to my house at night. I never had to worry about the security of my academic appointments. In that sense, although this has not been, these last decades have not been a good time for the left, at the time of rising inequality in American society, not a good time, but also not a dangerous time for those of us who are in opposition.
I see. Well, so the essay obviously makes, I guess, focuses a lot on the phrase moral concern, and it is, I guess, an attitude, or I guess a persuasion that many people have on the left and the right. You can see them both, and I guess their moral sentiments are derived from, I guess, Calvinism, Calvinist theology, and Puritan religiosity. You open by saying that you've spent a couple of years reading the theories of Puritanism and Calvinism. And as someone like myself who do not grow up in that particular context, how would you describe what the, I guess, Calvinist Puritan ethics that you describe here, I guess, mean?
Well, it was, first of all, a dogmatic commitment to human depravity, and then a sense of that these depraved human beings could, in fact, be rescued. And there were some contradictions there between Calvinist theories of predestination, which seem to deny free will, and the actual practice of trying to improve the morality and the conduct of one's fellow citizens. But the Calvinists did believe in predestination, and in practice, they didn't believe in it. In practice, they worked to change human beings, and they did this through mutual surveillance, watching each other, and mutual criticism. It was a heady time, a revolutionary time. Calvinism was, in the context of early Reformation and Catholic Europe, it was a revolutionary ideology. And where the Calvinists succeeded in establishing some degree of civil control, they were, as we would say, repressive. They would have shut down the theaters. They would have shut down various kinds of religious and secular celebrations. They didn't believe in dancing, men and women together. So we would call that repression, but it was done out of this heightened moral concern for the well-being, for the salvation of their fellows. I do think that this is one of the sources, probably not the only source, of left-wing moral concern, as manifest by the Jacobins or the American revolutionaries or the Bolsheviks. There probably are other sources within the history of the left. But this is the first revolutionary manifestation of what we call Puritanism, with a small p, of this idea that we have some responsibility to try to save our fellow Americans or fellow humans from false opinions and false beliefs and bad conduct. I think in some modified version, this is a legitimate effort. We all argue with the people we are closest to, trying to set them right when we think they are wrong. But this has taken very exaggerated forms. I am most familiar with the exaggerated forms on the left, but as you suggested earlier, they also appear, these same versions of intense repressive moral concern also appear on the right.
Let me just read from a passage from the essay. So, quote, moral concern goes far beyond nosiness. It's not just an interest in other people's beliefs and behaviors, or a readiness to talk about them. It's also an eagerness to improve both. Moral concern is different from compassion, which describes a sympathetic engagement with other people's physical or material well-being, with those who are sick or poor, or victims of flood or fire, or orphans, battered wives, disabled men and women. So I guess I have two questions stemming from that passage alone. The first being, well, when is the idea that you should be concerned about the well-being, as well as the moral fiber, the moral compass of your fellow human beings, turn into what you'd call the Puritan moral concern that we should all watch out for?
Yes, I think it turns bad. It turns to a kind of concern that we should oppose when it reaches toward coercion. When it aims at using the authority of the state. to say re-educate citizens forcibly, or to actively repress or discipline or arrest people who are expressing opinions thought to be immoral or subversive. So the turning point from the kind of moral concern that was expressed, say, in the American campaign to, I talk about this in the article, in the American campaign to recognize homosexual lesbian marriages. That was a campaign fought without coercion. It was a kind of political as well as a moral, and in some circles religious campaign in defense of not only toleration but a certain generosity toward sexual difference. And there was no coercion, and when these marriages were recognized, no one was forced to engage to marry that way, or so that is an example of what I think of as moral concern in its rightful place in our cultural and political life. And I gave many examples from the revolutions of unjustified, what I think of as unjustified, coercive, repressive forms of moral concern.
Okay. So the second question, I would like to, I guess, quote from two of the great founders of the American Republic. You have Alexander Hamilton, I believe, who says that if men were angels, then no government would be necessary. But you have John Adams, who said our Constitution was made for only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So I guess, given the understanding of both men, so is it legitimate to be, I guess, concerned about the, I guess, what do you call public morality in general, given, I guess, Adams's quotation?
Well, I think Hamilton may be closer to the truth, although I would acknowledge that in a culturally or religiously homogeneous society, government may be easier for Adams-like reasons, but I don't think we should try to work toward cultural or religious homogeneity. We now live in pluralist societies, and the pluralism can only be overcome coercively. And so we have to work around the edges, so to speak. Think of, for example, here is a religion that discriminates against women, and they exist in our democratic pluralist society, these religions, and some of us argue with the believers of these religions. And when there are, say, feminist protests within the religion, we support those protests. And at the extreme, we might advocate that the state should not allow for forced marriages or battered wives. But on the other hand, the Catholic Church does not allow women to be priests, and we give the same tax exemption that we give to every religious organization. So there is a way of living with pluralism, living with very different opinions, and arguing about them openly, and using coercion only at the edges to repress violence. So my moral concern very much extends to women living in ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities and in evangelical Protestant communities. And I'm happy to express my concern and to join in criticism, especially if the criticism comes from within. I would support it. But my concern does not extend to the use of government power to create John Adams's homogeneity or conformity.
So I think on the point of, I guess, religious/cultural homogeneity, it was Samuel Huntington's last book, Who Are We, was tackled exactly this point, in that he believes that the rise of immigrant population, especially those from the south of the American border, threatens to, I guess, defeat that particular Anglo-American Protestant religious cultural homogeneity that the US of A has. And despite Huntington being a lifelong Democrat, this particular line of thinking has made its way, predictably into the Republican Party and to the right. And I should say that I myself identify as an American conservative, and yet I very much am, what I should say, morally concerned about these rising trends of American right-wing leaning thought. But I would like to ask you, do you, I guess you do believe that pluralism and diversity of values and of, I guess, religion, creed, sexuality, race, etc., is a good thing in American society? How would you explain to someone who believes otherwise, who has the Huntingtonian concern, the case for diversity, so to speak?
Well, I am the grandson of East European Jewish immigrants who came to this country with absolutely no knowledge of democratic politics. Many of them obedient to their rabbis. And I am the child of their children who were already reading newspapers and voting and very much participants in American democracy. I think I think Huntington underestimates the assimilative force of American political institutions and political culture. But I agree that the education of the children of immigrants is very, very important. My parents and I went to public schools. We studied civics. We learned about American democracy. We voted for student council. Yes, so I believe in cultural pluralism, but I also believe that citizenship is a vocation, and it requires education, and that the public schools are very, very important in bringing immigrants or immigrant children into our political community. And I do believe that parochial schools and private schools have to be legally required to teach courses in American democracy, American history. I don't believe that parents have exclusive rights to the education of their children, because these children are going to grow up to vote in our elections. And so we all have an interest in their education. And an education in democracy seems to me to be very important. And from my own experience and my parents' experience, it works in alliance with the ongoing political processes in which immigrants and immigrant children are invited to participate.
Mhm. I see. Well, I think if you follow enough news from a conservative slant like I am, you would come out thinking that the parents as well as parents and teachers are adversarial in their approach to how to educate children. Well, being the idealist that I am, I don't believe that is necessary, needs to be the case. So, what areas do you think that parents and teachers of public schools have in common in, I guess, their shared goal of seeing healthy, well-educated, I guess, active, politically active children?
Well, I think that there is now a minority of parents who are being encouraged by right-wing demagogic politicians to fight a culture war in the schools. I think that most parents would support the kind of curriculum that I would advocate, an honest engagement with American history, which doesn't require white kids to feel guilty about the history of slavery, but an honest engagement and a very strong commitment to to the principles of democracy, which mean the principles of the rule of majorities, which are always temporary, and the necessary ongoingness of the arguments and the role of judicial review. I think an education along those lines would find overwhelming support among parents. Now, right now, sexual issues have been brought into the educational process, and I can't say without knowing much more about the textbooks. I do believe in some version of sexual education in high schools, not before. And I don't know the texts that are now being used or the objections that some parents have to them. I don't see any reason why an art history course for high school students should not include the statue of David naked by Michelangelo. I don't think kids would really be upset by that. And I think very, very few parents are really going to be engaged in that kind of a culture war. I think the engagement comes from outside the parent-teachers organizations. It is a political creation.
Yes, I believe in the same thing, and I think a recurring I guess element or conflict in American schools is that, well, a group of parents, I guess, well, motivated by, I guess, the right-wing demagoguery that you were speaking of, says that certain books and titles are are not appropriate for children and therefore should be removed from school libraries. One of the titles I can think of is the graphic novel Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and I think certain school districts are having concerns about like Anne Frank's diary too. Well, that is a major concern, but a parallel concern on the left wing is that recently we find efforts to cancel children's books. I believe last year was Dr. Seuss, and this year was Roald Dahl, because the language that they use are not fitting to the political sentiments of today. So I guess if you're, though the Puritan strain runs both ways, so to speak.
Yes, it does, and I would oppose all those attempts. I think the kids I know, are much stronger, more open than their parents, or at least than this group of parents. I do think that the horrors of modern history, including the Holocaust, should be taught to high school students and to university students. And I certainly think a straightforward account of slavery, which includes the opposition to slavery, is an important part of the necessary to the education of our children. And I don't see any way in which they could be harmed. They don't need to be raised in an entirely bland universe where they are never confronted with difference or even wickedness.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know about difference and about wickedness. And you won't ruin them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can ruin them.
I see. Yeah, I think so too. Looking back at American history and I guess the first settlers of North America, what you would call the Pilgrims, and I do believe they are Puritan in their, I guess, Christian beliefs. You see that, at least I see, there's both a democratic tendency as well as an undemocratic tendency in that, well, I guess if you believe in the American, the myth, I suppose, of American history, you would think that the Pilgrims settled in the colonies because they were afraid of religious persecution, and therefore they want to defy the British authority. So there's a certain sense of democratic, anti-authoritarian strain in that. And if you follow Max Weber's logic in his book, The Protestant Ethics, you'll find that, well, the Puritan ethic, with its select virtues, encouraged people to be successful in their, I guess, business capitalistic endeavors. So, but in order to have a successful capitalistic country, certain liberties have to be cemented. But nevertheless, the Puritan ethic is also undemocratic in its, and I guess in its fanatical belief in the corruption of mankind and its, perceived necessity to remove and eradicate all sorts of beliefs and elements and literatures that it finds to be, to be corrupting corrupting influence. So I wonder if you share the same view of Puritanism as I do.
Well, the Puritan ethic described by Max Weber did have the economic effects that you describe. I argued in my first book, The Revolution of the Saints, that it also had the similar effect politically. It encouraged political entrepreneurship. It encouraged political inventiveness and political activity. And I also believe that the voyage across the Atlantic, escaping from state persecution, did produce a more liberal Puritanism in the United States than you found in Britain. Although we did have our illiberal elements, proven in the witch hunts and in some of the blue laws enforced by the Puritans. But generally, the New England states were pretty much bastions of democracy, and later on of anti-slavery, anti-agitation. So I think my teacher at Harvard, Louis Hartz, wrote a book about liberalism in America and arguing the effects of the ocean voyage, leaving behind traditions of state repression and of hierarchy. I think he had something there. There is a story to be told about the differences. If you read some of the Puritan sermons in defense of the American Revolution, you see at least a quasi-democratic Puritanism.
So I believe once you understand, I guess, the Puritan ethic, I think you can find out the source of the, I guess, illiberal tension that it's still exists in American society today. And I think the American anti-communist cause, as well as its extreme manifestation, Senator McCarthy and McCarthyism, is a perfect example of it. And I know that you've lived through that particular period. I don't doubt that those who believe in the extremism of Senator McCarthy, they have a strong, I guess, advocacy for those who are actually persecuted under, say, Stalinism or Maoism and such, and there were legions of them. But nevertheless, they resort to the same tactics of persecution and denunciation that the Stalinists and the Maoists routinely engage in. I wonder, having lived through that particular period, I guess what are some of the insights that you've got from the period, and what warnings, if you do have one, and some, can you issue to future people who are, I guess, maybe hoodwinked by the neo-McCarthyites?
Well, McCarthyism was certainly a crusade against the American left generally, disguised as a crusade against the Communist Party, which was tiny.
Uh-huh.
And by McCarthy's time, without much influence, the Popular Front period of the 30s was long past in McCarthy's, when McCarthyism arose. But it was resisted. It was resisted by American conservatives. It was resisted by Dwight Eisenhower. It had a terrible effect on a small number of people, particularly teachers, writers, Hollywood actors and producers. That's where McCarthy aimed. he thought of those as right targets. And he had some success. Some very talented writers were blacklisted in Hollywood for years. Blacklisted, but then brought in to write and produce movies under a different name. Because McCarthyism never had a genuinely, never reached into very deeply into American society. But I agree, it was an experience of not of death camps, not of concentration camps, not of systematic famine, as in the Ukraine. It was a very American version in which nobody died, though many suffered. And it didn't last very long. Now some of the Trumpers would happily redo it, rework it, and maybe make it much more effective. But I hope they don't get the chance.
Yes, I can certainly see that the current Republican Party has basically turned into a Trump personality cult, and anyone who shows an opposition to Trump, it's ultimately denounced and taken from, I guess, positions of influence. And I guess in my studying of American history, I find that McCarthyism was not the first or the only Red Scare, so to speak, in American history. The first occurred during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, and that leads to the imprisonment of one Eugene Debs.
Right. Right.
So I believe he ran for president, Mr. Debs, as members of the American Socialist Party while being in prison. Am I correct in that?
I think he did.
Yes.
Yes. You have to realize he has become a saint of the American left.
So I wonder, does his status as the saint of the American left well warranted? And I guess what should Americans, especially American children, know about him?
Well, they should know the history of the American labor movement. That should be part of American history, and the history of the People's Party and the Socialist Party, which were part of that era, and which played a large part in generating the politics of the New Deal. The New Deal of the 1930s was the American version, a modest version of social democracy. And I think it should be taught that way. The left never came to power. The People's Party didn't elect William Jennings Bryan, and the Socialists did not elect Eugene Debs or Norman Thomas, but they had a major influence on American politics.
I believe that if you are on the left like yourself, I think revolution or revolutionary instincts would be something that you need to watch out on. And on the right, it is reactionary tendencies. It's those are, I guess, radical elements of both wings of the American political discourse. And in the essay on moral concern, you listed how in almost all the revolutions of modern history, including the American one, ultimately results in a heightened sense of Puritanism, even though, say, the revolutionaries like the Bolsheviks and also the Maoists, I must add, do not derive their moralities from Puritan ethics. So what connection can you make between, I guess, the revolution, if it is successful, and the, I guess, heightened sense of Puritanism that follows?
Well, revolutionary zeal, as you suggested, is common on the left, especially in periods of repression or tyranny. And some revolutions, like the American Revolution, I believe, were actually necessary. Um, they do produce a certain kind of fervor, a heightened sense of opposition on both sides, on the regime side and on the revolutionary side, and that brings to power often zealots, political zealots, who try to win through a policy of repression. I think its sources are probably connected. I can't speak for Maoism, but certainly in Bolshevism, in the American Revolution, in the French Revolution, there are residues of Christian Puritanism, but also there is this sense that that revolutionary commitment has to be total. And as Lenin said, sexual promiscuity is a waste of energy, of human forces, when people should be dedicated to the revolution and not to private pursuits that have nothing to do with the revolution. The commitment to the revolution must be all-encompassing. And we see that in every revolutionary situation, and it needs to be resisted, and it is resisted from within, and it's the forces of resistance that produce, if eventually, Thermidor, which is the triumph of the moderates within the revolutionary camp. I don't think it happened in Trotsky called Stalin the Russian Thermidor, but obviously he was wrong. Maybe Khrushchev was the Russian Thermidor, finally. And with Maoism, it hasn't appeared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you spent a good amount of the essay discussing the recent, I guess, abolitionist trend. Abolitionists, as in defund the police, not slavery abolition, as the word is mostly associated with. This is obviously gains a significant amount of traction during the summer of 2020 at the unjust murder of George Floyd, and you liken a passage from a young democratic socialist of America. I would like to quote here: "If people were regularly engaged in democratic processes at their jobs and in their neighborhood, and had their basic needs provided for, they would be more able and willing to sustain relationships of mutual accountability." And you make a comparison to Leninism. I guess control, Lenin goes on to say, will really become universal, general, national, and there will be no way of getting away from it. So a system of people policing one another. So not too unlike East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, so-called. So I guess with understanding the legitimate concerns of the abolitionists in police brutality and police racism, how would you advocate for the maintenance of a police force, as well as active citizenry participation in holding the police accountable?
Well, both of those things. I want to know about, to be able to recognize the people who are policing me, and I want them to be politically, judicially accountable and I want them to be trained, to be given a kind of professional training in de-escalation and restraint and toleration of difference and egalitarianism. I want all of that, and I want it done forcefully, energetically. But I don't want to be policed by my neighbors. I don't want to have the feeling that what I'm doing is being watched by people whom I can't recognize as trained watchers. I think a lot of the police abolitionists are not eager to repress each other or to repress the rest of us. I think they are just very naive about human goodness, and they seem to believe that without police, neighborhood watch would simply be so easy, so friendly, and brotherly admonition would be so gentle that we would find crime disappearing. And I think that is just not a plausible description of any of the neighborhoods I lived in or any of the cities I've lived in. And so I think they need to hear arguments like the ones I've been making and a lot of other people about a different kind of police, but still a uniformed police.
So, final question. I believe the first way called gateway, so to speak, to radical politics, either on the left or on the right, is the belief that the political process, as it is today, is not working, is broken, and my vote would not matter. And I think two parallel, I guess, movements of radicalism occurred during the Obama presidency. One is Occupy Wall Street, and the other is the Tea Party. And as divergent ideologically as they are, they both believe that the political system has not been working for them. And also, as an advocate for, I guess, an increase in, I guess, intelligent and reasoned civic engagement, how would you persuade someone that, well, the political process works according to your participation, and as long as you are a active civic participant, well, it will work the way that it is supposed to work?
Yes. There is a tendency, especially among young leftists. I probably thought this way at some points in my life. Look, some leftists will say, look, I signed a petition. I marched in 2 marches and nothing changed. It's time for revolution. And I want to say left politics is steady work. It consists in doing the same thing over and over and over again. And the more people you recruit to do it, the more likely you are to have successes. But you also have to have some political sense. The Tea Party militants went to work from the beginning to take over local Republican Party branches, to influence the national party. And Occupy Wall Street made no effort to do that vis-a-vis the Democrats, the Democratic Party. They boasted about being spontaneous, to have no leaders, no organization. That can be very exciting. I visited some of the sites of Occupy Wall Street, and they were lovely. The people were lovely. But this was a politics going nowhere because it wasn't engaged in the political process. It was a celebration outside, and that doesn't work. So I think the history of the civil rights movement, the history of the anti-war movement is different. We worked, the anti-war movement, which produced the candidacy of Gene McCarthy, we worked to change the Democratic Party. And although we didn't elect Gene McCarthy, we did have a very large influence on the politics of the party. That politics is, it's a phrase from my political mentor, Irving Howe, the founder of Dissent magazine. Politics is steady work.
Yes, of course. And yes, I'm also a great admirer of Irving Howe, and I certainly believe that I haven't read him enough. But with that said, thank you very much, Michael Walzer, a beacon of intellectual and philosophical excellence, for joining this program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, take very good care of yourself.